thought about doing stuff on what we do, but actually given that you're in the research area and that as we go to 2020, 2030 and 2040, that particularly in Ireland the built environment is going to carry kind of this, it's going to have to shoulder a lot of our meeting of targets. I thought I'd actually talk about what we're doing in that kind of context in Ireland, our journey towards 2020, our National Development Plan for 2030, and you know how that's going to split out. I suppose a little bit for those of you who are welcoming to Dublin, who may not know about SEAI. So it's the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. We're the National Energy Authority, established by statute in 2002. We've grown to an organisation of 120 people and growing with an annual budget of 150 million. Within that, we work really across everybody from the citizen right through to large organisations, public sector, and organisations like DIT as a public sector body, meeting their efficiency targets, where public sector in Ireland has a stretch target for 2020 of 33%. And I suppose we have grants from, if you want to put a solar panel on your home, or if we're doing research in ocean or kind of pre-commercial technologies, and also do a lot of work on kind of modelling, designing policy options for our own parent department and government, and everything in the middle, to be honest. So we kind of have three principles under which we work as an organisation, and that underpins actually a lot of government policy in this area. And it's kind of using less, using clean and innovating. So I suppose using less, energy efficiency, and I think it'll be not surprising to this audience, but sometimes it can be a challenge to actually get people to do energy efficiency first and not to run off and say, you know, renewables is the next best thing. So it's actually making sure that you've, like, it's the most immediate and economical kind of way to use your opportunities. I suppose once you've reduced your demand, it's then fully exploiting local renewable energy sources in a, what am I saying there? In a socially and environmentally sustainable way. And that can also be a challenge. We'll talk a little bit about it later, you know, where there's a great talk about moving to biomass, but you know, what actually is sustainable biomass when you're doing it for at scale. And then I suppose innovating, which is probably again more the space that you're in, and looking like technological, economic and social approaches to the sustainable energy transition. And that's kind of our mandate in terms of leading and coordinating energy research and innovation to support policy evidence as well. Looking at kind of 2020 and 2030, I suppose the 2030, when we look at 2030, everybody knows in Ireland we're likely to miss our targets. I can talk a little bit about the figures in a minute. But when we're looking at 2030, and I suppose this is where policy is focusing now at the moment, we're looking at a 40% cut in greenhouse gas emissions based on 1990 levels. I suppose that's only the starting point. It's looking at going to 60% and then up to 80% by 2050. The next two figures have asterisks. They're still currently probably getting finalised now, but under negotiation, looking at 20% on final consumption from renewables and 20% improvement on energy efficiency versus 2007. I suppose when we translate that back to us as a member state, and while they're being finalised, we kind of know the general shape. I suppose what happens if we miss those targets? We have the monetary fines, which, you know, for a small open economy like Ireland, can have a significant impact, impacting the economy. But I think also we depend very heavily on foreign direct investment. We depend very heavily on our green credentials and our sustainable credentials. So actually, fines have I suppose, an impact that is actually beyond the money. But the money is significant for a country that's kind of just out of a bailout. And most of the Irish people in the audience will tell you what that experience, well, the older ones will tell you what that experience was like for the last 10 years. One of the key things with the new targets beyond 2020 is that they're going to be annual targets. Whereas our target up to this was you hit 2020, you had options to do things this year and next year to hit 2020. The 27% is going to be annual, so it'll get progressively harder to catch up every time we miss one of those, if we miss them. And I suppose there's the moral imperative where we're talking about it's further damage to the climate in the ones where we don't manage to make it. And I think when we look at those targets, you know, for 2020, the kind of on the renewables on the 16%, we're likely to hit somewhere between 12 and 14% in Ireland. So it's looking at what we can do over the next couple of years to reduce the impact of likely fines on that one. Because on the efficiency, we're going to hit 13-14% maybe of, it's 16% of the 20%. But if we improve on energy efficiency, which there's a big focus on, clearly that eases off the pressure on the renewables targets. But the government produced a national development plan recently. It's part of Project Ireland 2040, where we're looking at the vision to 2040. In that, there's 7.6 billion exchequer funding identified for energy and climate kind of headlines within it. They expect that to lead to 14.2. Not 100% sure where those figures come from, but clearly expecting significant leverage on that government investment. So we're actually doing commissioning some research at the moment as to what mechanisms could be introduced to look at how you get that private investment leveraged. And I think within that, it's also worth saying there's 750 million identified for public sector buildings. Now, again, that's very welcome when everybody looks at it, but in Ireland at the moment, as we've come out of the recession, we have a real challenge with market capacity, you know, and so 750 million is nice to say we have, but actually, where are the skills, where's the capacity, where's the market, how do we deliver it? And that's even working with the kind of technologies and that we have at the moment. So, and then in addition to that, there's a 500 million climate action fund. So money isn't going to be a problem. It's actually delivery is going to be the challenge, and I think finding clever ways to do things, looking at scalable models, particularly in the public sector, and we do a lot of work on that. But the Climate Action Fund and the kind of the first call for that is out at the moment, and that's really kind of cutting across transport, energy efficiency, kind of really large-scale renewable and research, and then also tipping into agriculture. So is it going to be enough on its own? No, and I think it's really going to have to be combined with taxation, regulatory, and I think particularly the whole behaviour change. One of the things, even at a small level, that we find is, you know, you introduce energy efficiency, and without the appropriate behaviour change, you're actually not achieving the savings that you a lot of the time expect. We've established a behavioural economics unit within SEAI over the last 18 months, and doing a lot of behaviour research and using the insights coming out of our various programmes that we do to look at kind of behavioural as well as technology and market in terms of the three that contribute to energy efficiency. So I suppose, is it enough to solve the problem? Probably not in isolation, but it's a very important marker that's actually set down in terms of our journey along the low carbon and to become a climate resilient society. In the development plan, just going down into some of the kind of actions that are in there, which gives you an idea of the scale and that are identified for delivery. On the energy efficiency side, it's looking at moving from 25,000 to 45,000 homes annually. That's not insignificant for a country that has a housing crisis that we can't solve in the short term anyway. Replacing oil boilers, getting at least 170,000 of them out of the system. And all public buildings and 1/3 of commercial buildings up to a B-rated building energy rating. Now that's a huge challenge, as I think I see Lloyd and Mark seriously nodding here in the front. Moving on to transport, looking at 500,000 electric cars by 2030 and more charging infrastructure. Now, we've actually really began to move with electric cars over the last 12 months, but we've moved from 1,000 electric cars to 2,000. And of the nearly 2 million cars on the road, I was looking it up last night, and there's 5,444 were electric and hybrid by the end of 2016 or 2017. So that is huge. Now the infrastructure, and we do a lot in SEAI, we have grants for electric cars, we have grants for home chargings, but there's a big jump in that. It's expanding the refuelling network for alternatively fuelled vehicles. And that's one that even in the short term we might need to be using to hit transport renewables for 2020. And major investments in public and sustainable transport. And I think that's already happening, and some of that will be where the Climate Action Fund can help a bit more on that. And then finally on renewable heat, it's really moving to town scale activity, and then full rollout of our what we're great for synonyms in Ireland, so it's the SSRH, which is the support scheme for renewable heat. We did originally call it the renewable heat incentive, but with the Cash for Ash scandal in Northern Ireland, we decided we better change the name. So we are actually at SEAI looking at rolling that out over the next 6 to 12 months as for a start. Moving from the immediate then, the kind of the more long term that are in that are energy research funding, so I suppose the whole research and innovation. Big investment planned to go out that. The rollout of the National Smart Energy Metering Programme, that's been long heralded, but is actually, procurement is underway at the moment. We're looking at 250,000 metres over 2018, 2019, and then pilot a climate smart countryside. Reinforcement of the grid, so looking there at conversion for carbon intensive power plants. Again, this is another one where biomass comes in as the great panacea, but one of the things that we're actually commissioning some research on the moment is how do you define sustainable biomass? You know, because the supply chain, and when it comes to emissions, you know, it's where it's coming from. How do you actually achieve it locally where it is really renewable? So we're looking at that at the moment. And then the renewable energy, the renewable electricity support scheme. And again, for that one, that has really been delivering here in Ireland, and I suppose the key thing to say about that is that it's technology agnostic. So it's actually about really being ready to do what is ready to come on. I was going to do just a very quick flick through, as I was there this morning, I was talking to somebody and we were talking about BREEAM and LEED, and I was going, God, I should have talked about Exceed, which is a certification scheme that we have, which looks at optimising energy efficiency. I'd encourage you to go onto our website and look at that, building energy ratings. But on these ones, these are, I suppose, a suite of programmes that we roll out to the residential sector. So we have a Better Energy Homes, where as a homeowner you get a grant. This is if you can't afford to do your deep retrofit, you can actually move up your rating on by doing single technologies, doing your insulation, adding your solar heating over time, rather than doing a kind of a one big bang. That's what we call the Can Pay, and then we have warmer homes for people who are fuel poor and can't afford to do it, where we actually deliver energy efficiency measures if you're on certain social welfare benefits, that we actually directly deliver retrofits to homes. We then have, which is probably the more interesting one for the audience here, is a deep retrofit pilot programme. And this is a combination of because when we look at the transformation that has to happen in the building, in the residential sector, over the next 10 to 20 years, it's looking at what really are the barriers and how do we get the market to function that it can deliver a full retrofit to a home in a way that a homeowner can have confidence that it's best value for money and is going to deliver on the energy efficiency side. So we started a pilot last year, and this is one where you have to bring your home up to an A-rated. It's some things like it's mandated mechanical ventilation, so it's looking at the multiple benefits of and the health benefits of that. We're just beginning to get some data out of that, where there's some research going on. It's fabric first. There's no funding for fossil fuels, and then it's looking at, I suppose, giving us insights into costs, into technologies, into how the market operates, and also, I suppose, the financial bit of it is how do you stimulate that activity, because it is quite significant. So that's an interesting programme, and maybe one to watch for as data comes out, to kind of look for research. We have community energy grants. We do a lot of work in the community, really, which is about operating locally, acting locally, starting with sustainable energy communities. We have grants where we do domestic and non-domestic together, but we also have a network of just bringing people. It's a sustainable energy community network. We're now up to 200 communities registered where we work with a local community, and it can be a local community of, it can be anything from Weight Watchers to a community of houses. It can be a street, it can be a town, it can be a city, but working with them to put an energy strategy in place and work through that. We have 210 now registered all over the country where we're working with that, and then trying to work and bring in supports to that. Started a new solar PV pilot program just recently. We have our whole building energy rating. Again, I was having a chat over coffee, and that was one. That's a huge data set. I think we've about 750,000 building energy ratings, so with a huge amount of data that's accessible to researchers on, housing stock and I suppose the shape of Irish housing stock, and that's within a system which has, as I say, all of the data, like very detailed data on that, and just want to be aware that it's there kind of as a data set. And then we have electric vehicles. But then the other one on that we've developed is an extended advisory report. Again, trying to give good information to homeowners about their decision-making process to move to a more energy efficient home. And then finally, electric vehicles, and we have grants now for both batteries, if you buy one, and home chargers. So that's a very quick squeeze. I mean, we do so much across so many sectors, and I think, people like Lloyd and Mark and DIT people here will know some of that, but you can always go onto our website. So I suppose maybe just a last few commitments going back up to the bigger picture. So the NDP commitments to energy and climate, they are significant, and the commitment to finance is significant, but it's not going to be enough in isolation. But as I said earlier, it does set down a marker and a government commitment to Ireland Inc. in terms of the journey that we're going. I think achieving it is going to be a monumental challenge, and I don't think there's anybody in the country that actually underestimates that. And I suppose it's inherently cross-sectoral and integrated, and this is one of, I suppose, the biggest challenges is to get that integration and get that kind of the cross-thinking across government and across all kind of institutions of the state to bring the leadership required to actually deliver on that. So that's, I suppose, a quick tour of just maybe the bigger picture before you drop down into all your detailed ones. Hope it was useful, and there's my email address if anybody has any follow-up questions, or I'm happy to answer. Thank you.